The kennel worker counted 21 rejection forms. She had stopped laminating them after the 15th. The German Shepherd sat in the back corner of the run and watched her lay the folder on the desk with the precise attention of a dog who had learned that paperwork meant disappointment. And he did not move from his corner. And he did not wag his tail. He had stopped doing that a long time ago. Most dogs in the facility pressed themselves against the chain link when a visitor came. This one turned away. Turned away from all 20 of them. Nobody could explain it. Nobody had been able to explain it for 14 months. Then a man in a gray canvas jacket walked through the door, and the dog stood up. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story touches you, please subscribe and stay with us until the very end. What you're about to hear about this dog and the man who finally understood him is something we think you'll carry with you long after the video is over. We read every single comment. We want to know how far this story travels. His name was Cole Reardon, and he was 39 years old. And the first thing most people noticed about him was the way he moved, deliberately and without waste. Each step placed with the quiet certainty of a man who had long since stopped measuring distance in city blocks and started measuring it in threat assessments. He was 6 feet and 1 inch, broad at the shoulder in the way that comes not from vanity, but from years of carrying weight no gym had ever been designed to prepare anyone for. His hair was close cropped, darker brown going silver at the temples, and his jaw carried 4 days of growth that had never quite decided whether it was becoming a beard. His nose had been broken once, in Kandahar province in 2017, and it had healed slightly right of center, and he had never thought about it once since the day the field medic cleared him to return to duty. His eyes were the color of deep water on an overcast morning, not blue, not gray, but somewhere between them, steady and unhurried, and measuring in the way of someone who had spent years reading rooms, exits, people, and distances without ever seeming to look directly at anything. People who met Cole Reardon often could not remember exactly what his face looked like. They always remembered his eyes. He had served 11 years as a Navy SEAL, Team 3, then Team 6, with deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and a classified operation in northern Syria that he had signed documents agreeing never to describe in any medium, public or private. He had earned a Bronze Star with Valor in Kandahar, and a second one in Mosul, and he had received both of them the same way he received most things, quietly, without ceremony, and without keeping the citations anywhere he would have to look at them. He had separated from the Navy 22 months ago, following a training accident that left nerve damage in his right shoulder that the surgeons had told him they could manage, but not repair. The Navy had offered him a desk. He had declined. He had driven to Bozeman, Montana instead, rented a house with a long gravel driveway and a field behind it, and spent the better part of a year doing the kind of nothing that men who have spent a decade at full operational tempo discover they do not actually know how to do. He was not broken. He was careful to know the difference. He was simply recalibrating. In the same methodical way he had always approached any problem that required patience, not forcing it, not rushing toward a resolution before he understood the problem completely. He had tried a few things. Contract security work he found hollow. A semester of college courses he found patronizing. A steady effort at silence that he found both necessary and insufficient. What he had not tried, what he had been thinking about for 6 months, and putting off with the particular procrastination of a man who suspects something will matter more than he is ready for it to, was a dog. The Gallatin County Canine Rescue had been recommended to him by a former teammate named Shep Donahue, who now ran a veteran services organization in Colorado, and who had told Cole, over the phone, with the directness of a man who had once trusted Cole with his life, that the dog had been returned 20 times because nobody understood what they were looking at. "He's not broken," Shep had said. "He's trained." There's a difference, and most people don't see it. Cole had driven 3 hours without stopping. He had not called ahead. The dog's name, according to the intake file, was Ranger. He was a 5-year-old German Shepherd with a coat of deep black and amber gold that ran thick along his back and shoulders like something weathered and permanent. He weighed 82 pounds. His left ear had a crescent-shaped tear along the outer edge, a scar from a flashbang deployment during a building clearance in Helmand Province in 2020. And the wound had healed smooth and white against the dark fur in a way that was unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen the aftermath of those operations. He moved. When he chose to move, with the particular efficiency of a working dog who had never needed to perform, deliberate, low energy on the surface, the stillness of compressed attention. His eyes were a dark, clear amber. They missed nothing. They trusted no one, or had not, until the moment the man in the gray canvas jacket walked through the facility door and Ranger stood up for the first time in 14 months. The rescue coordinator, a woman named Janet Pruitt, who had worked the facility for 9 years and believed she had seen every kind of dog behavior there was to see, watched the shepherd rise to all fours from across the room and felt something in her throat tighten. She had tried everything with this dog: diet changes, enrichment programs, professional trainers with credentials she had paid for out of her own pocket. The dog was not aggressive. He was not fearful. He was simply somewhere else, somewhere the adopters hadn't been able to reach, somewhere 21 of them had walked away from, and 2 of them had surrendered him back from with genuine regret, saying they loved the dog but couldn't get through to him. Janet had begun to believe, in the quiet honesty of closing time when the facility emptied out, that the dog was waiting for something specific, and that she could not manufacture what he was waiting for. Now Ranger stood at the back of his run, ears fully forward, and watched Cole Reardon walk toward him without retreating. That was the first thing Janet noticed. He didn't retreat. He stood his ground the way dogs do when they are choosing to engage rather than endure, and his tail, the tail Janet had not seen move with any real intention since October, began to move. Cole stopped at the chain link. He did not reach through. He did not speak. He crouched down to the dog's eye level, and he waited. Ranger took 3 steps forward. He pressed his nose against the chain link and breathed in, and the amber eyes held on Cole's face the way trained dogs learn to hold. Not aggression, not submission, but recognition. Something in the dog's posture changed, the way tension leaves a body when it has been held for a very long time, and something finally gives it permission to let go. "What happened to his ear?" Cole said, not looking away from the dog. Janet hesitated. Flash bang. During a building clearance. He was a military working dog, Helmand Province, attached to a Marine Raider unit. His handler was killed in 2021. He was repatriated and cycled through the adoption program, but something about the transition didn't. The evaluators said he'd lost confidence, that he'd shut down. Cole was quiet for a moment. He studied the notched ear and the dark amber eyes, and the way the dog's weight had shifted forward. The way a dog's weight shifts when the decision has already been made, and the body is simply catching up. He didn't lose confidence, Cole said. He lost his person. Janet looked at him. He's been waiting to find someone who speaks the same language, Cole said. That's not a broken dog. That's a dog who's been surrounded by people he has nothing in common with. He did not look away from Ranger when he said it, and Ranger, for his part, pressed his nose flat against the chain link and held it there. Cole signed the paperwork that afternoon. He signed it with the same unhurried deliberateness with which he did most things, and he did not ask how many people had returned the dog, though Janet told him anyway, because she felt he had a right to know the full picture. He listened to the number, 20, with a 21st pending, without changing his expression. He said he understood. He did not say it the way people say they understand when they mean they will try. He said it the way men say it when they have already processed the information and made the decision and are simply completing the formality of the conversation. He had driven 40 minutes back toward Bozeman when he let Ranger off the leash for the first time in a pull-off beside a creek. The dog stood in the gravel for a moment, ears up, reading the air. Cole sat on the tailgate of his truck and watched, and did not call to him, and did not rush him. Ranger walked to the creek. He drank. He turned around and walked back to the truck and sat down at Cole's left knee and stayed there, close enough that his shoulder touched Cole's leg, and did not move from that position for the rest of the stop. Cole put his hand on the dog's back. Ranger exhaled. He didn't know yet what would come from this. The call that would arrive 11 days later, or the situation in town that would test both of them in ways he hadn't been tested since Kandahar. He had driven out that morning looking for a dog. He was driving home with something more like a partner, and the distinction would matter more than he knew. The trouble in Millhaven, Montana, had been building for the better part of 2 years, and like most trouble in small towns, it had been building slowly enough that the people inside it had stopped seeing it clearly. The man at the center of it was named Preston Vale. He was 46 years old, the second son of the family that had owned Vale Timber and Land Holdings for 3 generations, and he had inherited, along with 4,000 acres of timbered hillside, a commercial trucking operation, and a name that appeared on 2 library wings, the high school football field and the county fair grandstand, a belief so thoroughly reinforced by his environment that he had long since stopped examining it, which was that consequence was something that happened to other people. Preston Vale was not physically imposing. He was medium height, soft around the middle, with a practiced friendliness he deployed in public the way a man deploys a tool, efficiently, and then put it away when the work was done. He drove a black Range Rover and had a handshake he'd been told was firm. He sat on the county planning board and had recently joined the Parks Foundation, and he attended every high school football game because his money had funded the lights. He did not think of himself as a bad man. He thought of himself as a practical one, and he had long ago decided that a town this size would produce whatever version of reality his money required, because it always had. What his money had required, over the past 18 months, was the quiet transfer of 5 parcels of land belonging to elderly and widowed landowners who sat adjacent to a planned resort development on the North Ridge. 4 of those transfers had been completed, pressured through with paperwork, legal delay, financial coercion, and in one case, a visit from Preston's attorney that the 81-year-old woman who owned the property had described to her daughter as the most frightening conversation she'd had since her husband died. The 5th parcel belonged to a man named Walter Grimes. Walter Grimes was 76 years old, a Vietnam veteran, 101st Airborne Division, 2 tours, discharged in 1971 with a Distinguished Service Cross and hearing in his left ear that had never fully returned. He was 5'9" on a good day, with a veteran's posture that his spine maintained out of habit, and a face that had the settled, weathered quality of a man who had lived outside in all seasons for most of his life. He was not a wealthy man. He was not a particularly public one. He had 38 acres of river pasture that had been in his family since his grandfather had cleared it in 1931, and a farmhouse that needed a new roof and a well pump that was starting to show its age, and he had no intention of selling any of it to any party at any price, and had said so twice in writing. After the second refusal, his fence line had been cut in 3 places. His truck had been keyed in the parking lot of the hardware store, A water rights issue, one that Walter's attorney described as manufactured, had appeared in county court 2 months ago and had not yet been resolved. The pressure was not violent. It was the kind of pressure that doesn't leave marks. It was the kind that breaks people eventually, unless someone notices. Cole had driven into Millhaven to pick up supplies from the hardware store 11 days after bringing Ranger home. He didn't know Walter Grimes. He didn't know Preston Vale. He had been in town 3 times total, and had spoken to perhaps 7 people in all those visits combined, which was approximately the social volume he was comfortable with at this stage of his readjustment. He had Ranger with him, because Ranger was always with him now, riding in the passenger seat with his muzzle pointed slightly toward the cracked window, reading the air as they moved through the town's main street in the particular concentrated quiet that had become Cole's favorite thing about the dog. Ranger went still 2 blocks from the hardware store, not still the way he went still when he was simply riding. This was a different quality of stillness, a locked, precise attention that Cole had learned to read in the past 11 days, the way you learn to read any language that matters, immediately and correctly, and without second-guessing it. Cole eased the truck to a stop and looked. In the parking lot of the Millhaven Farm and Feed, a man in a Range Rover had his driver's side window down and was speaking to an older man standing beside an aged Ford pickup. The older man's posture was the posture of someone absorbing unwanted pressure without showing it, back straight, chin up. The particular dignity of a man who has been in worse situations and survived them. But his hands, Cole noticed, were very still at his sides. The stillness of a man using all his discipline to keep them that way. Ranger pressed his muzzle to the window glass. Cole pulled in. He didn't park close. He crossed the lot at an angle, unhurried, and stopped near the farm supply entrance, and he clipped Ranger's leash and came down from the cab and walked toward the 2 men at a pace that could have meant anything. He was 10 feet away before Preston Vale registered him, and when Vale turned, there was a moment, half a second, no more, where the practiced friendliness reasserted itself. Because Preston Vale had learned to be pleasant to strangers until he understood whether they were relevant. "Help you with something?" Vale said. "Just picking up supplies," Cole said. He looked at the older man. Morning, Walter Grimes looked at him. Morning, Ranger sat at Cole's left side. He was not facing Vale aggressively. He was simply facing him, ears forward, amber eyes direct, 78 pounds of trained attention making its orientation unmistakable. "Nice dog," Vale said, and his tone had changed very slightly in a way that professional men's tones change when something has introduced itself into a situation that they haven't accounted for. "He's all right," Cole said. He looked at Vale. "I don't think I've met you. Preston Vale." The handshake was offered and Cole took it and returned it with exactly the force that was offered and nothing more. "I own Vale Land Holdings, up on the ridge." "Sure," Cole said. There was a beat of silence. Ranger did not move, did not look away. "I was just speaking with Walt here about a business matter," Vale said. "County thing. Nothing dramatic." Cole looked at Walter. Walter said nothing. His eyes were quiet and measuring. "I'll let you 2 finish up," Cole said. He did not leave. He moved to the bed of Walter's truck and rested one hand on the side rail, which put him between the 2 men, and he looked out across the lot with the air of a man with nowhere to be and no particular agenda, which was an air that Cole Reardon had refined over 11 years of operating in places where presenting a specific emotional profile was a professional requirement. Vale looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Ranger, who had not taken his eyes off Vale. "I'll follow up with you later, Walt," Vale said. He put his window up. Walter waited until the Range Rover had pulled out of the lot before he exhaled once, quietly, through his nose. He looked at Cole. "I don't know you," Walter said. "Cole Reardon. I'm renting a place out on the Bridger Road." Walter looked at Ranger. "What kind of dog is that?" "German Shepherd. His name's Ranger. He was a military working dog, Marine Raider Unit, Helmand Province." Walter was quiet for a moment. He looked at the notched ear. Something in his face shifted. Not much, but enough. "Vietnam," he said. 101st Airborne." "Yes, sir," Cole said. Walter looked out at the empty space where the Range Rover had been. "He's been at me for a while now," he said. "Won't quit. My attorney says the water rights case is manufactured, says it'll take 8 months to work through county, and by then, Vale figures I'll be tired enough to sign. How's your attorney?" "Good enough. Expensive," he paused. "I haven't told my daughter how bad it's gotten. She worries." Cole nodded. He knew the shape of the thing now. He'd seen it before. Not exactly this, but the template of it. The man with resources applying them systematically against someone who had none. Betting that time and attrition would do what direct confrontation could not. He'd seen it work. He'd also seen what happened when someone put themselves between the machinery and the person it was designed to grind. Ranger pressed his flank against Cole's leg. He didn't know yet what he was going to do. But Ranger did. In the particular way of dogs who have been trained to follow threat assessments through to their conclusion, and who know the difference between a man who is walking away and a man who is taking a breath before he begins. What happened next built slowly, the way real things build. Cole drove out to the county clerk's office and spent an afternoon reading the public filings on the water rights dispute. And what he found was the thing that people who believe they are invisible to scrutiny tend to leave behind: a pattern. The filing that initiated Walter's dispute had been submitted by a law firm that had filed 4 nearly identical disputes against 4 other landowners in the Millhaven North Quadrant in the previous 18 months. 3 of those landowners had sold within 6 months of the filing. 1 had held on for 11 months before selling. All 4 sales had transferred to a shell company called Ridgeline Property Partners, LLC, which had a registered agent in Helena and a beneficial ownership structure that required 12 hours of document research to trace back to a Vale family trust. Cole had never been a lawyer. He had, however, spent 2 years doing what SEAL teams call target development, the systematic collection and analysis of information about an adversary that transforms a vague threat into a precise picture. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. It was one of the few things he'd found in civilian life that used the same part of him that service had used, and he moved through the documents the way he'd moved through operational planning, methodically, without haste, building the case from the specific outward rather than from the general inward. He called Shep Donahue in Colorado that night from his kitchen table with Ranger asleep across his feet. "I need a land rights attorney," Cole said. "Montana. Someone good. Someone who takes cases like this." Shep was quiet for a moment. "Define like this." Cole did. Shep listened without interrupting, which was a thing he did when the information was serious. "I know someone," Shep said. "Her name is Maria Calderon. She worked federal land fraud cases for 8 years before she went private. She's in Bozeman." He paused. "Cole, this isn't a small thing you're walking into." "I know. Vale's got county board connections. He's funded the Sheriff's Department auxiliary for 6 years. I know. So you know that calling the sheriff on this is probably not your first move." "It's not my first move," Cole said. Ranger shifted against his feet. 3 days later, Maria Calderon drove out to Walter's farmhouse and sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours with the documents Cole had compiled. She was 52, sharp and compact, with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent a career working cases where the other side had significantly more resources. She read the documents twice, asked 31 questions, and at the end of it she set her pen down and looked at Walter. "This is a pattern of coordinated legal harassment designed to compel a distressed sale," she said. "It's sophisticated, and it's not illegal on its face, but there are 3 filings in here that I believe crossed a line. If they crossed it, I can prove it." She looked at Cole. "You did this research in 2 days? 3 days?" She nodded slowly. "You've done this before." "Different context," Cole said. She looked at him for a moment longer than was necessary, and then turned back to Walter. "I want to take this case. There will be fees, but I'll defer a portion against any recovery." Walter was quiet. He looked out the kitchen window at the field that his grandfather had cleared. "I'm not interested in a settlement," he said. "I want to keep my land." "That's what I'm going to get you," Maria said. It was the sheriff's department that Preston Vale called when he discovered that someone had been pulling documents from the county clerk's office, and that an attorney from Bozeman had appeared at Walter Grimes's property. He called a deputy named Harris, who was a reasonable man and not corrupt, but who was also a man who had grown up in Millhaven and who understood, in the unconscious way of people raised inside a particular gravity field, that certain situations were better handled quietly. Harris called Cole's landlord. The landlord mentioned that his tenant had served in the military, and Harris filed that away without quite knowing what to do with it. What Vale did next was direct, and without legal exposure. He had his attorney send a letter to Maria Calderon informing her that should she proceed with any action arising from the Grimes dispute, Vale Land Holdings would respond with a counterclaim asserting tortious interference with business relationships, and that the relevant county board had been made aware of the situation, and that the timeline for resolution of the water rights matter had been moved forward, which, as his attorney framed it, suggested the outcome might arrive faster than originally anticipated. It was a threat. It was also, Maria told Cole over the phone, a tactical error. "He moved first because he's rattled," she said. "Rattled people make mistakes. That letter tells me we're closer than I thought to a filing he can't walk back." Cole was standing in his field with Ranger when she said it. The dog was sitting at his knee, looking north, where the ridge was. Not nervous, just attentive. "How long do we need?" Cole asked. 10 days, she said. "Maybe 12. He told her he understood. What happened in those 10 days happened the way most decisive things happen. Not in a single moment, but in a series of small ones, each one turning the situation by a degree that was only visible in aggregate. Cole drove to the county clerk's office 2 more times and identified a 5th parcel, one that Vale had apparently miscalculated would transfer without resistance, belonging to an 80-year-old woman named Ruth Hannigan, who had never received the letter of intent and whose family had not been notified of the water rights filing made against her land. Maria added Ruth's situation to the case. The addition changed the legal character of the pattern from aggressive business practice to something with a specific statutory name in Montana state law. On the 9th day, Preston Vale walked into the Millhaven Farm and Feed where Walter Grimes was buying seed and told him, in a voice low enough that no one else would catch it clearly, that the water rights ruling was coming in 2 weeks, and that if Walter had any sense he would call Maria Calderon and tell her to stand down, because the outcome was already arranged, and the only thing that was going to change if he kept fighting was how much it cost him to lose. Walter looked at him. He did not answer. He picked up his bag of seed and walked out. He called Cole from the parking lot. Cole was in Bozeman with Maria Calderon when the call came in. He listened without interrupting. When Walter was done, Cole said, Don't call anyone else. Don't do anything. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He was there in 38. Ranger was in the passenger seat, ears up, watching the road with the focused attention of a dog who understood urgency. What Cole had not told Walter, and had not told Maria until the evening before, was that 3 days ago he had driven to Helena and spent an afternoon with a contact, a former JAG officer named Richards, who now worked for the State Attorney General's office, and had given Richards the full document package he'd compiled, including the pattern of filings, the shell company structure, the beneficial ownership trace, and the letter from Vale's attorney to Maria Calderon. Richards had read it that day. Richards had made 4 phone calls. One of those calls had reached a federal investigator at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Great Falls, because the shell company structure crossed a jurisdictional line that moved the matter from county civil court to something considerably larger. Cole had not mentioned this to Vale. He had not mentioned it to anyone except Maria the night before, because she had a right to know the shape of what was coming. He pulled into Millhaven at 4:17 in the afternoon. He parked behind the farm and feed, where Walter was waiting beside his truck. Ranger came out of the passenger side and went directly to Walter and sat at his knee, uninvited, deliberate, the amber eyes soft in the way they went soft for people the dog had decided belonged in his small circle of trust. Walter put one hand on the dog's head without looking down, the way men do when the gesture is too natural to be conscious. Preston Vale's Range Rover was parked across the street. Cole crossed the street at a walk. He did not gesture to Walter, and he did not look behind him to see if Ranger had moved, because he knew the dog had moved, and he knew where he would be. Vale saw him coming and got out of the car, because men who have operated from a position of long-term impunity have difficulty recognizing the specific quality of approach that means something has changed. "I want to talk to you about Walter Grimes," Cole said. He stopped 6 feet away. His voice was level and unhurried. "And about Ruth Hannigan, and the Carters, and the Delacroix, and the Wens. All 5 parcels. And Ridgeline Property Partners." Vale's expression changed. It was not dramatic. It was the particular adjustment of a face that has been operating on one set of assumptions and has just been handed information that invalidates them. "I don't know what you think you know," Vale said. "I know exactly what I know," Cole said. "I spent 11 years in environments where imprecision had consequences. I was precise." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He did not hand it to Vale. He held it at his side. "There are federal financial crimes investigators in Great Falls who have a copy of this. There is a state attorney general's contact who has a copy of this. Maria Calderon has a copy of this, and Walter Grimes has a copy of this, in the hands of his attorney, which is admissible as evidence of a coordinated pattern of coercive property acquisition in the state of Montana." He paused 1 beat. "You can call your attorney. That's the right move. I'd do it tonight." Vale stared at him. The practiced friendliness had left his face completely. What was underneath it was simpler and less composed. The expression of a man who had arranged his world so carefully that he had genuinely not prepared for a version of it where someone had done the work. "Who are you?" Vale said. Cole introduced himself by rank, branch, and number of deployments, the way he'd been trained to brief command, and then he told Vale, with complete calm and without raising his voice, the same thing he'd told him the first time, 2 weeks ago, in a farm supply parking lot, though this time the meaning was different. "I'm telling you," Cole said, "not asking you." Ranger had come to stand beside him without being called, and stood now at Cole's left, weight forward, amber eyes tracking Vale's face with the unhurried precision of a dog who has been in enough real situations to know the difference between a threat and a man who has just stopped being one. Vale looked at the dog. He looked at Cole. He said nothing. He got back in the Range Rover. The formal investigation opened 4 days later. The State Attorney General's office filed a civil action against Ridgeline Property Partners LLC and its disclosed beneficial owners, which the investigation would ultimately confirm included Preston Vale and 2 family trust instruments, on charges of coordinated real property fraud and coercive interference with landowner rights. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit opened a parallel investigation into the shell company's structure. Vale's attorney negotiated a temporary restraining order against any further land actions while the cases proceeded. The County Water Board withdrew the manufactured water rights filing against Walter Grimes 3 weeks into the investigation, citing procedural errors, a withdrawal that Maria Calderon noted in a filing of her own was convenient and telling. Preston Vale resigned from the County Planning Board in October. His Range Rover was gone from the Millhaven Main Street by November. The Vale family timber operation was placed under federal oversight, pending the financial investigation's completion. The name on the high school football field lights was quietly removed during winter recess. Nobody in Millhaven called a meeting to discuss it. Some things resolve in the way water resolves, slowly, completely, without fanfare. 7 months after the afternoon in the Farm and Feed parking lot, Walter Grimes sat on the porch of his farmhouse on a June morning with a cup of coffee and watched the river pasture in the early light. His roof had been replaced in April, a project that a veterans volunteer crew from Bozeman had offered to complete for cost of materials, through a program Maria Calderon had mentioned in passing and then quietly arranged. The well pump had been replaced by a neighbor who had simply shown up one Saturday with the right tools and declined payment. Small towns, Walter had always believed, were capable of this. A slow and imperfect justice that required someone to go first. Cole had driven out with Ranger on the first Saturday of every month, the same way he'd driven the miles since January. Ranger would come off the passenger seat and walk directly to Walter's porch and press his head against Walter's knee for a long moment, and Walter would rest a hand in the thick fur at the dog's neck. And the 3 of them would sit for a while in the particular quiet of people who have been through something together and arrived on the other side of it. Cole always brought coffee. Walter always had the biscuits that Ranger had discovered on the second visit and had never forgotten about. Cole drove home from those Saturdays on roads he had come to recognize. The curve where the Bridger Road bent north, the stand of cottonwoods that marked the county line, the pull-off beside the creek where he'd let Ranger loose for the first time and watched him drink from the water and come back. He had not returned to a desk job. He had not filled the quiet with noise. He had done something simpler and considerably harder, which was to stay present in a life that had not yet fully resolved into a shape he could name, and to trust that the shape was coming, the way he had trusted Ranger's stillness that first afternoon in the kennel. Not because trust was easy, but because the evidence in front of him was specific and real, and pointed in one direction. The nerve damage in his right shoulder was unchanged. The house on the Bridger Road still needed weather stripping along the south-facing windows. Shep Donahue called every 2 weeks, and they spoke for 20 minutes, and neither of them said much that was unnecessary. These were the facts of the life. They were sufficient. They were. Cole had begun to understand in the mornings when he stood in his field with Ranger at his side, and the light came in across the pasture from the east. More than sufficient. They were what enough looked like, when a person stopped measuring it against something they'd been told it was supposed to resemble. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or declaration. Sometimes they walk into a kennel on a Tuesday in November, and a dog that 20 families couldn't reach stands up from the back of his run, and the thing that was broken in both of them finds its edge and begins, quietly and without ceremony, to heal. God does not always send the rescue we imagine, the sudden reversal, the dramatic intervention, the moment where the sky opens and everything is clear. Sometimes He sends a man who knows what trained stillness looks like, and a dog who has been waiting for someone who speaks his language, and He sets them both down in a town where someone needs protecting, and He trusts them to see it and to act. The world is not saved in a single moment. It is saved in the accumulated weight of people who pay attention, who refuse to keep driving, who recognize the shape of a thing that is wrong and are willing to be the inconvenient presence that changes it. If you have ever stood between someone and something that was grinding them down, then you understand what this story is really about. It is not about a dog. It is about the particular courage of choosing to notice and staying. If Ranger's story and Cole's and Walter's touched something in you today, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that justice still finds people, even in small towns on gravel roads where the names on buildings belong to the wrong people. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever seen someone step in when they didn't have to, we want to hear that story too. Stories like yours carry this conversation further than anything we could write. And if you believe in the courage of ordinary people, in the loyalty of dogs who never forget their purpose, and in a faith that places the right person in the right parking lot at exactly the right moment, please subscribe so you never miss the next story we bring you. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you today and every day that the ones who have been waiting the longest are sometimes the ones who needed you the most.